Some people have called the Joseph story in the book of Genesis a novella. Now, a novella is a story that's longer and more complicated than a short story, but not as long as a novel. So a novella is a story which is longer than a short story, but not as long as a novel. And so what we have here in the book of Genesis is from the 37th chapter of Genesis until the end, the 50th chapter, we have a novella. And it takes Joseph from age 17, when he's a teenager, and follows his life until he dies at age 110. Oh, sometimes the Bible exaggerates those ages. That's a lot of ink. That's a lot of space. That's a lot of story to give to a person's life, which would cause us, or should cause us, to know, to think that there's something very important here. If the Bible gives this much space and story, this is obviously something that we need to pay very close attention to. It's a story not to be missed. Last week we began that story, as some of you who were here may recall. It's a story of this young man, Joseph. As I said, and as you agreed with, he was a snot. He was full of himself. He was the favorite among the 12 boys. He was Daddy's favorite. He was the one who got the long-sleeved coat with many colors. He was the one who had the dreams of superiority and domination. He was the one who wore the coat around the house and said to the other brothers, "Daddy loves me more than you. Na 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 na." And they hated him, of course. They hated him. Now, hate is a secondary emotion. Whenever hatred appears in the human heart, it most always is an emotion that's secondary to fear. We hate when we fear. That's why in the New Testament, I think, it says in 1 John that perfect love casts out fear. We live in a world of so much hatred. So much. Everywhere across the globe, it seems that all of these people are so full of hatred all over the world. It's so epidemic. It's so vicious. And it's all because we are so afraid. We are so afraid of one another. And because of this fear and because of the hatred that it generated in this household, the older brothers sold Joseph into slavery, caravan going to Egypt, and soaked the coat. Now it's only one color. It's the color red. They soaked the coat in an animal's blood, and they took it to the father, and they showed it to the father. Your son, the one you loved. They were willing to break their father's heart because they could not suffer their brother. What we do, we of the human family, the pain and the suffering and the inhumanity that we do on this planet to one another, it's incomprehensible. We are full of so much hatred, the human family. Look what we do to each other because of this fear, this hatred. And so, as the story progresses in Joseph is sent into slavery. And he must have felt as if he had lost everything. He went from being the favored son, having everything. And now he's placed in a caravan and he's headed into slavery and he's lost everything. He's lost it all. He must have wakened the first several nights in the sleep and thought, I hate my life now. I hate my life. Look what's happened to me. Look where I am. I've lost everything. And so something happens. But by the time this young man reaches Egypt, he's changed. What's happened? What's happened to Joseph is that his adversity became his opportunity. When we wander in or fall into and experience our setbacks, our failures, our adversity, when life falls apart for us, we think it's the worst thing that could ever happen. But Joseph discovered that the worst thing that could ever happen was now the best thing that could ever happen. I remember when I was a young pastor, and I may have told this story before. I sometimes forget, but if I've said it here or maybe at another location. But if I've said it before, it was. Well, I had gone to lunch with one of my church members, and he happened to be about my best friend in the congregation. It wasn't just a friend. His wife taught flute to my daughter. I usually took Sandy to her flute lessons, and I was in their home every week, waiting for her lesson to be over, to take her back home. Their two daughters and our two daughters were the same age exactly, and they were friends, and they were together all the time. And we camped together. We would go up to Wisconsin, and there was the deepest lake in Wisconsin, and there was this beautiful place for camping, and our families camped together. We shared so many wonderful moments, friendships. My friend was a professor in the vet school at Purdue University, became one of the deans, outstanding person. He was smart. He was dedicated to the faith, to the church. He was kind. He's the kind of person that you would like immediately if you met him anywhere. And he took me to lunch. It was not a great lunch, it was McDonald's, but he took me to lunch. And as we shared the meal together, Gordon began to explain to me where I had failed as pastor of that church. It's one of the hardest lunches I've ever had. Coming from the best friend I had in the congregation. And he was right at every count. He was absolutely right. I'll never forget that lunch. Do you know what happened? I changed. I remember a long time ago I was with a lay minister who was going to be preaching the next day. We were at some kind of youth event. It was a Saturday, and I had my sermon ready, and I said, "Now, what are you preaching tomorrow?" And he said, "Well, the title of my sermon is The Difference Between a Pig and a Person." Well, that kind of caught my attention. I wonder what he would say about that. So I come on now, tell me more. What's the difference between a pig and a person? And he said, well, you can dress up a pig, you can perfume a pig, you can put the best clothes in town on a pig, but a pig is always going to be a pig. A person can change. We have this debate, don't we, about are we primarily who we are because of nature, or are we primarily who we are because of nurture? You know that old debate. I used to think, when I was much younger, I used to think it was 90% nurture. That people were sort of born as a clean slate. And we get to write on someone's life. And so the way we love someone or don't love someone, the way someone is treated in the family by brothers and sisters, by teachers, and by others, that this nurturing process creates the person. I used to think it was 90% nurture. And then I had 2 daughters. And I look, they came into the world, each with a distinct personality. And as they grow up, and if you met them today and listened to them talk, there's one that's an extrovert and there's one that's an introvert, and the way they see life and talk about things, you would think they're not even sisters, much less have the same parents. And so I changed my mind. I said, oh no, it's not nurture, it's nature. It's 90% nature. They come into the world and they're who they're going to be, and we can't do much about that. So I really don't know. It's sort of like a football. When a football falls down on a field, on the grass, it bounces this way, and then it bounces that way, and you never know which way it's going to bounce. And that's kind of the way I see it now. It's a big mystery to me. Why are you the way you are? It's some mysterious interplay, isn't it? Between nurture and nature. But in the story of Joseph, he changes. And he changes because of his response to adversity. He once was spoiled brat, And now he's in a caravan and he's on his way into slavery into Egypt. Now someone tells him when to get up and when to sit down. He doesn't get to order his food from a menu. They throw him whatever he's going to eat for the day. He has lost everything. Everything. He has nothing now. But somehow, his adversity, the worst thing that could ever happen to him, became the best thing. I read a sermon when I was much younger that has stuck with me for a long time. The title especially, it was The Advantages of Disadvantages. What we learn from our challenges, from our hurts, from our wounds, and from our pain can be such a great opportunity, such a marvelous teacher. And so here's Joseph. He's on that long journey through the Sinai desert under a cloudless sky. And he begins to think. That long journey. Who am I? Who am I in relationship to my father now? Who am I in relationship to the brothers who I taunted and who I enraged? And as he made that long journey, step after step, as he thought about his heritage of faith, Abraham, his great-grandfather, how God had worked in his life, and Isaac, his grandfather, and how God had worked in his life, and Jacob, his father, and how God had worked in his life, his heritage, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, his family. As he thought about how God worked in their lives, and he enters into Egypt land. And he's a changed person. The worst thing that could ever happen to him now is the best thing that could ever have happened to him. And as the 39th chapter begins, he's in Potiphar's home. And the first thing, the second verse of chapter 2, do you see the change there? It said, the Lord was with Joseph. What happened? You see, the Lord was with Joseph all the time. The Lord didn't show up when Joseph stepped into Egypt land. The Lord was with Joseph the moment he was born. The Lord was with Joseph all of the years of his upbringing. But now, because of what he's experienced, because of the adversity, because of the pain and the suffering that he has gone through, he sees it. He knows it. He feels it in his bones. What was always there. That the Lord is with me. And so the worst things that can happen now become the best things that could ever happen. He discovers the Lord is with me. And that verse, the Lord was with Joseph, if you paid attention or counted, it shows up 3 times in that 39th chapter of Genesis. It shows up as he begins his work in Potiphar's house. He's the servant in Potiphar's house. The Lord is with him. He knows it. And so he's no longer the dandy. He's no longer the center of attention. He no longer thinks of his talents and abilities as something to boast about, but he sees that all of his gifts, and they were multiple gifts. This is a talented person. He sees that all of these gifts that God has put in his life are not for him to strut around, but to be put in use. God never gives us anything that we're supposed to keep, hold on to, boast about. No! Everything that God puts into our hands is meant to be given, shared, put to good use. And so now Joseph puts to good use his gifts in Potiphar's house. And it says that Potiphar's household, what? Just flourishes. Everything is wonderful. Potiphar puts Joseph in charge of his household, and everything is fabulous. It's never been better. Everything is just right. Except there's this lustful woman there who notices that, how does it say? He was well built and handsome, and she's frustrated somehow, and she attempts to seduce him, and he runs out of the house without his outer garment and falsely accused of rape. And so what does Potiphar do? But he puts Joseph into the prison. And as soon as Joseph gets in the prison, it says, but the Lord was with Joseph. You see what's happening here? Now, every place that Joseph goes, he realizes, I can't run away from God, and I can't lose everything, because every time I lose something, God comes and blesses and fills and strengthens my life. And so now the warden, what does the warden do? He puts the inmate in charge of the prison. He puts Joseph in charge of the whole prison, and the warden goes off and plays golf every afternoon. Because now Joseph is blessing the prison. And then the chapter ends by telling us the third time. And the Lord was with Joseph. So, isn't it a story? Israel needed to hear that, didn't it? That's why it's in the Bible. Israel needed to hear. The Lord was with Joseph in the pit and in the prison and wherever he went. Israel needed to hear that. And the church then, as it came into being, needed to hear that. The church needs to hear that. The Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord is with us. And we today, who know what it's like to be thrown into a pit, we today who know what it's like to be cast into a prison of despair and hopelessness, pain and anguish, we today need to know that these bad things that happen to us are not the worst things that could ever happen to us. You know what the worst thing that could ever happen to you would be? The worst thing that could ever happen to you would be for you to forget. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord is with us. The Lord is with me now and always, ever and ever. Amen.